You know, when you think of medieval battles, you probably picture these giant, chaotic clashes on an open field. But forget what you've seen in the movies. The real heart of medieval warfare was the siege. And it was less of a messy brawl and way more like a brutal, high-stakes game of chess. Strategy, patience, and yeah, pure terror. Those were the key pieces on the board.
This was the question that kept medieval kings and engineers up at night. I mean, think about it. Your enemy is locked up inside a massive stone fortress that was literally designed to be impenetrable. So how in the world do you win? Well, the answers they came up with were both incredibly clever and absolutely terrifying.
And this is a really crucial point. Those big open field battles, they were actually pretty rare, super risky. The real power, the thing that let you control land and people, came from controlling the castles. They were the strategic hubs. So if you wanted to win the war, you first had to win the siege. Simple as that.
Okay, so to really understand how you take a castle apart, you first have to appreciate just how brilliantly they were built to resist. We're going to look at the incredible layers of defense an attacking army would have to smash through, one by one.
In the early days, you saw a lot of this Motte and Bailey design. It's pretty straightforward, right? You've got a wooden tower on a big old mound of earth, that's the Motte, with a walled courtyard, the Bailey, down below. It's a solid start. But wood has one teeny tiny weakness: fire. And that vulnerability is exactly what pushed the evolution towards the massive stone fortresses that would soon dominate the entire landscape.
All right, so picture this. You're leading an army to attack a castle. The very first problem you face isn't even the wall. It's getting to the wall. You're staring at a massive ditch, a moat. And it doesn't matter if it's wet or dry, it instantly makes your biggest, scariest weapons, like siege towers and battering rams, pretty much useless. You can't just roll them across. Now this is where the architecture gets really, really smart. Early castles had square towers, which, if you think about it, create blind spots right at the corners where attackers could hide from your archers. The solution? Round towers. Genius. They gave defenders a full 360-degree field of fire. And as a bonus, that curved foundation was way harder for enemy miners to collapse from underneath.
So let's say you were brave enough, or maybe foolish enough, to charge the main gate, which was always the most heavily fortified part of the castle. You'd find yourself in what's basically a death trap. Right above your head are these openings, aptly named murder holes, where defenders could just pour down rocks, boiling oil, sand, you name it, anything to stop you in your tracks. And get this, even if you somehow managed to breach the outer walls, the fight was far from over. Because right in the middle of the castle, looming over everything, is the keep. It's a castle within a castle. This was the final stronghold, the last line of defense, where the Lord and his toughest soldiers would make their last stand.
So you're the attacker, and you're staring at this absolute beast of a fortress. You're probably not going to start with a full frontal assault. No. Your opening moves were often much more subtle. They were aimed at two things: the defenders' minds and their stomachs.
You really had two main options to kick things off. The first was the long game, a total blockade. You surround the castle, cut off every single supply line, and just wait. Let starvation and desperation do the heavy lifting for you. The other option was a bit more civilized, more chivalrous. You'd make a formal demand for surrender, basically offering the defenders a chance to walk away with their lives.
But if that nice, chivalrous offer was rejected, well, the gloves came off big time. Psychological warfare became a go-to weapon, and as you can see here, it was unbelievably brutal. Launching the severed heads of captives over the walls was horrifyingly common. It sent a very clear message to everyone inside: surrender, or this is what's waiting for you.
Okay, so let's say patience and terror just aren't cutting it. It's time to escalate. The mid-game of the siege is all about one thing: punching a hole in those massive stone walls using the most powerful technology of the age.
So let's break down the heavy hitters. At the top of the list, you've got the king of siege engines, the trebuchet. This beast used a giant counterweight to hurl enormous projectiles. Its job was to smash walls. Then you have the mangonel, which used the tension of twisted ropes. It was great for just lobbing rocks and fire over the walls to cause chaos inside. And finally, the ballista. Think of it as a giant crossbow. It was an anti-personnel weapon designed for sniping defenders off the walls with terrifying force.
Just to give you an idea of the kind of power we're talking about with a trebuchet, a big one could launch a projectile that weighed up to 250 kilograms. That's about 550 pounds. That's like launching a small cow through the air. Imagine that slamming into a stone wall over and over again.
It was absolutely devastating. Now, if you couldn't go through the wall, well, you could always try going under it. This tactic was called undermining, and it was as clever as it was dangerous. Specialized miners would dig a tunnel right underneath a section of the wall, propping it up with wooden beams as they went. Then, they'd pile in flammable material, set it all on fire, and run. As the props burned away, the tunnel would collapse, and a whole chunk of the castle wall would come crashing down with it.
So, the walls are battered. Maybe there's a breach from undermining. The siege is now entering its final, and by far, its most violent phase. The time for long-term strategy is over. This is the end game, a full-blown, bloody assault.
So you've done it. You've spent months starving them, bombarding them, digging under their feet, and you finally have a breach in the wall. So what's next? Well, now you bring out the really scary stuff.
Enter the siege tower. I mean, just look at this thing. It was basically a mobile fortress on wheels, often covered in wet animal hides to protect it from flaming arrows. Its whole purpose was terrifyingly simple. Get a bunch of your best soldiers up to the same level as the defenders, drop a drawbridge, and let them storm the battlements.
And the scale of these things was just mind-boggling. To give you a real-world example, during the siege of Lisbon, the attackers built towers that were over 24 meters tall. That's more than 80 feet. Can you imagine being a defender and seeing this wooden monster, this 8-story building, slowly rolling towards your walls? It must have been terrifying. You know, as a siege dragged on and on, any idea of chivalry or rules of war just went right out the window. It became all about winning, no matter the cost. Attackers would try any dirty trick in the book, forge letters from the king ordering a surrender, poison the castle's well with dead animals, or even use their trebuchets as biological weapons, launching diseased corpses over the walls to try and start an epidemic inside. So, eventually, one way or another, the siege comes to an end. Maybe the walls fall, maybe the defenders finally surrender, or maybe the attackers just give up and go home. But for the loser, the end of the fight was often just the beginning of the horror.
And let's be really clear here. If a castle or a city fought to the bitter end, mercy was almost never shown. The victorious army, after months of hardship and watching their friends die, was usually let loose. For the people inside who had refused to surrender, the price of their defiance was often everything they owned and their lives.
And this brings the victor to one last crucial move in this massive chess game. You've just spent months trying to destroy this fortress, so what do you do with it now? Do you repair the damage and use this strategic location to control the region? Or do you just tear it down, raze it to the ground to make sure no one can ever use it against you?
You know, this whole medieval arms race between stronger and stronger castles and more powerful siege weapons, it leaves us with a really fascinating question. It was this constant cycle of innovation, right? Every new defense just inspired a new kind of attack. It really makes you wonder, in any kind of conflict, is any fortress, whether it's made of stone or data, truly unconquerable for long?